The Hawthorne Crown rose above downtown Seattle, its glass walls reflecting the rain and the scattered lights of Elliott Bay. The private ballroom on the top floor was filled with white orchids, crystal glasses, and guests whose names appeared regularly in financial newspapers. That evening belonged to the Whitmore family. Graham Whitmore had transformed a regional investment company into Whitmore Global, an empire with offices across several countries. His wife, Evelyn, controlled Seattle society through influence, donations, and fear. Their 30-year-old son, Nathan, had inherited his father's appearance and his mother's cruelty. The celebration was officially Nathan's engagement party. His fiancée, 27-year-old Naomi Carlisle, came from an old shipping family whose fortune had declined. Newspapers described their engagement as a love story, but everyone in the ballroom knew it was a business arrangement disguised with diamonds. The evening's true purpose was the announcement of a partnership between Whitmore Global and a Japanese technology company represented by Kenji and Yumi Nakamura. The agreement promised Graham greater wealth and international power. Among the black uniformed servers was 24-year-old Leah Vale. Leah worked at the Hawthorne Crown because nearly every dollar she earned paid for her mother's medical care. Margaret Vale lived in a neurological center outside Tacoma, where a progressive illness had taken much of her strength and independence. Before the hospital bills, Leah had studied classical singing. Margaret had once performed in small theaters, and Leah had inherited her remarkable voice. Music was the dream they shared, but necessity had forced Leah to abandon auditions and work long shifts, carrying trays for people who rarely looked at her face. "The Whitmore table needs champagne," said Arthur Dawson, the banquet manager. Arthur was in his late 60s and had hired Leah after hearing her sing quietly while arranging chairs. "Be careful," he added. "Mrs. Whitmore has complained about everything tonight." Leah lifted a chilled bottle and crossed the ballroom. Evelyn noticed her approaching. "At last," she said loudly. "Did someone travel to France to collect it?" Nathan laughed. "Good service is difficult to find, Mother. We should be grateful she remembered which end of the bottle to open." Several guests smiled. Leah kept her expression neutral. "I apologize for the delay, ma'am." She poured for Graham first. He barely acknowledged her, remaining focused on Kenji Nakamura's discussion of production forecasts. When Leah reached Naomi, the young woman gave her a small, apologetic look. Unlike the Whitmores, Naomi appeared uncomfortable with the mockery. Nathan leaned back as Leah approached him. "Watch the jacket," he said. "It probably costs more than your annual salary." "Of course, sir." As Leah began pouring, Nathan extended one foot into the aisle. His shoe caught her ankle. Leah lost her balance. The bottle fell onto the carpet, sending champagne across the white tablecloth and over the sleeve of Evelyn's silk dress. The nearby conversation stopped. Evelyn looked at the stain in disbelief. "You useless, clumsy girl. I'm very sorry. I lost my balance." Leah reached for a napkin, but Evelyn struck her hand aside. "Do not touch me." Nathan watched with a satisfied smile. This is what happens when standards disappear. Graham finally looked up. He did not ask how Leah had fallen. He did not notice Nathan drawing his foot back beneath the table. "Dawson," Graham called. "Remove her and deduct the damage from her wages." Arthur hurried forward. "I will take care of it, Mr. Whitmore." He gently led Leah away while Evelyn continued complaining about incompetent employees. Near the service corridor, Leah heard her say, "One wonders where people like that come from." Leah touched the silver locket hidden beneath her uniform. Inside was a faded picture of Margaret as a young woman. Beside her stood a thin man holding a guitar. Margaret had called him Gabe. He was the musician she had loved, and the father who disappeared before Leah's birth. In the hallway, Arthur released her arm. "Nathan tripped me," Leah said. "I saw." "Then why does everyone pretend it was my fault?" Arthur lowered his eyes. "Because this is their world." Leah had heard similar answers for years. She had accepted insults because her mother needed treatment and because pride did not pay medical bills. But something changed that night. The Whitmores had not merely humiliated a server, they had treated her life, her sacrifices, and her dreams as objects of entertainment. For the first time, Leah felt that remaining silent might cost more than losing her job. Arthur instructed Leah to remain at the back bar. "They want you away from their table," he said. "Do not give them another reason to fire you." Leah washed champagne from her hands. "Thank you for helping me. Just do not do anything reckless." What would be reckless? Arthur looked toward the ballroom doors. Tonight, telling the truth. When Leah returned, the incident had been erased with the efficiency money could purchase. New linen covered the table. Evelyn wore a wrap over her stained sleeve. The musicians played something cheerful, and the guests resumed their conversations. Yet Kenji Nakamura continued watching the Whitmores. He had seen Nathan's foot. He had also seen Graham punish Leah without asking a single question. Yumi whispered to her husband. Kenji answered with a thoughtful nod. From behind the bar, Leah studied Graham. She remembered an evening at the care center when Margaret's mind had briefly returned to the past. He had wonderful hands, her mother had said. Strong, but gentle. He could make a guitar sound like rain. Then Margaret told her about a song called "The River Keeps Your Name." Gabe had written it during a poor but happy winter. He compared Margaret to the Cedar River, quiet on the surface but powerful enough to reshape stone. Leah had heard fragments of that melody throughout childhood. Margaret sang it while cooking, folding laundry, or trying to distract herself from pain. The song was never recorded. It existed only in Margaret's memory and Leah's voice. Across the ballroom, Graham's fingers tapped silently on the table. The rhythm caught Leah's attention. It was not the impatient movement of a businessman, it was the complicated pattern of someone imagining chords. Leah told herself it meant nothing. Gabe was a common nickname. Graham Whitmore came from an established family. He had attended expensive schools and built a life completely different from the poor musician Margaret described. Still, something about him disturbed her. Whenever Evelyn turned away, Graham's confident expression weakened. Weariness appeared in his eyes. For a moment, he looked less like a powerful chairman and more like someone trapped inside a life he had chosen. Nathan noticed Leah watching. He raised 2 fingers and summoned her. Arthur shook his head from near the kitchen doors, but Leah could not refuse without being dismissed immediately. She approached. "Yes, sir?" Nathan smiled. "We were discussing ambition. My mother believes people in your profession are satisfied with simple lives. I said even a waitress must have dreams." Several guests turned toward them. "What do you dream about?" Nathan asked. "A larger tip? A cleaner uniform? Becoming head waitress?" Laughter spread around the table. Naomi looked down. Kenji did not smile. Leah faced Nathan. "I dream of a world where a person's value is not measured by the price of his jacket." His smile vanished. "How dare you speak to me that way?" "I also dream about music," Leah continued. "I dream of standing on a stage and singing something true enough that people cannot ignore it." Evelyn laughed coldly. "A singer? Can you actually sing, or is that another task you perform badly?" The challenge hung between them. Leah thought of Margaret struggling to hold a cup. She thought of the bills waiting in her apartment, and of every insult she had swallowed to keep her mother safe. She had always believed endurance was courage. Now she understood that endurance without boundaries could become surrender. "Yes," Leah said. "I can sing." She turned away from the table. Nathan called after her, but she continued toward the small stage at the end of the ballroom. Arthur intercepted her. "Leah, stop. I cannot. You will lose your job. I think I already lost something more important." The string quartet had begun its break. Their instruments remained on their stands, and one silver microphone waited beneath the lights. Guests whispered as Leah climbed the steps. Evelyn gripped Graham's arm. "Make her come down." Graham did not move. Something about Leah's posture seemed familiar to him. The straight back, the raised chin, and the quiet defiance awakened a memory he had spent decades suppressing. Leah took the microphone. The ballroom gradually fell silent. She looked at Nathan, Evelyn, and the guests who had laughed. Then her gaze settled on Graham. "The song I am about to sing was taught to me by my mother." Graham's tapping fingers stopped. Leah drew a slow breath. Then she sang the first note of "The River Keeps Your Name." The sound filled the ballroom without accompaniment. It was not the uncertain voice of an amateur. Leah sang with the control of someone who had studied for years, and the emotion of someone who had lived every word. The opening verse described a river carrying the reflection of a person who had disappeared. The melody rose gently before turning through an unusual sequence of notes. Graham's face lost its color. He recognized it. He had written that melody nearly 25 years earlier in a cramped apartment near Capitol Hill. The ballroom vanished from his mind. He saw Margaret sitting beside an open window, her dark hair damp from the rain. Back then, he had not been Graham Whitmore, respected financier and future chairman. He had called himself Gabe. Gabe was a musician with an old guitar, little money, and impossible confidence. He and Margaret played in coffee houses, worked temporary jobs, and believed talent would eventually rescue them. One winter evening, Margaret had watched a report about flooding along the Cedar River. "A river can carry everything away," she had said. "Or bring something home," he answered. He wrote the song before morning. Now Leah sang the melody he had buried beneath decades of contracts and carefully maintained silence. Some lyrics were different. Margaret had changed them after he left. "The river keeps your name beneath the stone. The current knows the promise you abandoned. Gold may build a house above the shore, but no locked door can silence moving water." Graham reached for his wineglass, but his hand shook. The glass slipped, and red wine spread across the linen. Evelyn stared at him. "What is wrong with you?" He could not answer. The next verse carried him toward the moment that had divided his life. Evelyn's father, Charles Everhart, had attended one of Gabe's performances. Charles disliked the music, but recognized intelligence and ambition in the young man. He offered Gabe a position at his financial firm. The salary was more money than Gabe and Margaret had earned in several years. There were conditions. Gabe would stop performing, use his legal name, leave his poor acquaintances behind, and begin appearing publicly with Evelyn. Gabe told himself the choice was temporary. He would become wealthy, return to Margaret, and offer her a better life. Then Margaret told him she was pregnant. Instead of returning, fear turned his ambition into cowardice. He left Seattle without seeing her. He sent one letter filled with promises he never kept. The following year, he married Evelyn. Gabe disappeared. Graham Whitmore took his place. On stage, Leah's voice rose. Nathan sat frozen, no longer laughing. Naomi watched with tears on her cheeks. She did not know the history, but she understood the song's meaning. It described trading truth for comfort and discovering that a beautiful life could still become a prison. Kenji shifted his attention from Leah to Graham. He saw recognition, guilt, and terror on Graham's face. Yumi saw the same. Near the service doors, Arthur stood motionless. Before becoming a banquet manager, Arthur had worked as a sound technician in Seattle's small music clubs. He had known Margaret and Gabe. He had carried Gabe's guitar downstairs after the musician's final performance. Arthur had suspected Leah's identity when she applied for work and mentioned Margaret, but Margaret had made him promise not to reveal the truth unless Graham chose honesty first. Graham never had. Leah entered the final verse. She sang of a river surviving winter because water continued moving beneath the ice. Her voice carried pain, but not helplessness. It carried judgment. When the final note faded, no one applauded. The silence was too heavy. Leah lowered the microphone. My mother's name is Margaret Vale. Graham closed his eyes. She told me this song was written by the man she loved. He was a poor musician with a cheap guitar and a dream of changing the world. Evelyn looked from Leah to her husband. No, she whispered. My mother called him Gabe, Leah continued, but that was not his full name. She removed the silver locket from beneath her collar and held it toward the lights. The man in this photograph is Gabriel Graham Whitmore. Whispers swept through the ballroom. Leah took one step forward. I believe he is my father. Evelyn rose so quickly that her chair fell backward. Nathan turned toward Graham. Graham could have denied everything. One more lie might have protected him for several minutes. Instead, he stared at Leah's face. He saw Margaret's eyes, his own chin, and the courage he had never possessed. Margaret, he breathed. The name was barely audible, but everyone near the table heard it. In that single broken word, Graham confessed. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Guests stood, reporters raised their phones, and conversations collided across the room. Evelyn seized Graham's jacket. Tell them she is lying. He remained silent. Tell them, Evelyn shouted. This family will not be destroyed by a waitress looking for money. Nathan stared at his father. Is she telling the truth? Graham opened his mouth, but no answer came. Evelyn turned toward Leah. You planned this. You found a photograph, learned an old song, and created this performance to extort us. Arthur walked forward. She planned nothing. Evelyn looked at him with contempt. What would a banquet manager know? I knew Margaret Vale, Arthur replied, and I knew Gabriel Whitmore before he became the man at your table. Graham looked up. Arthur. You remember me after all. This is a conspiracy, Evelyn said. No, Arthur answered. It is a consequence. Kenji Nakamura rose. The surrounding noise weakened, as people sensed that the business partnership was about to be decided. Mr. Whitmore, Kenji said, before tonight, I believed our companies shared similar values. Graham stood unsteadily. This is a private family matter. It has nothing to do with our agreement. Kenji glanced toward Leah. A man's treatment of those who cannot benefit him reveals more than his treatment of business partners. You know my professional history, Graham said. We have negotiated for months. I know your reports. Tonight I learned what you do when truth becomes inconvenient. Evelyn stepped between them. You cannot abandon a major agreement because an employee created an emotional scene. Kenji remained calm. I watched your son trip her. I watched your husband punish her without asking what happened. I watched your family turn humiliation into entertainment. Nathan's face reddened. That is absurd. Yumi spoke quietly. We both saw your foot. Several guests confirmed it. Nathan looked around as though the room had betrayed him. Kenji faced Graham again. Our company depends on trust. We will not place its future with a man who abandoned his child, concealed the truth, and treated that child as worthless when she stood before him. Kenji, reconsider. The partnership is ended. No one spoke. Those 4 words carried the weight of billions. Kenji and Yumi bowed respectfully to Leah before walking toward the exit. The crowd opened for them. Naomi stood next. Nathan saw her reaching for her engagement ring. Do not do this. She removed it. You enjoyed hurting her, Naomi said. It was a joke. A joke allows everyone to laugh. You cannot end our engagement because of accusations against my father. I am ending it because tonight showed me the person you are. She placed the ring beside the spilled wine. Your mother measures people by usefulness. Your father abandoned a woman and child for ambition. You learned to make cruelty entertaining. Naomi's voice trembled. I kept hoping marriage would improve you. The truth is that I hoped money would make my fear comfortable. Evelyn stared at her. Your parents will be humiliated. Perhaps. At least their humiliation will be honest. Naomi walked toward Leah. Two private security guards pushed through the crowd. One reached toward Leah's arm. You must come with us. Arthur stepped between them. She is not going anywhere. We were ordered to remove her. This is still my ballroom, Arthur said. You will not touch her. She disrupted a private event. The Whitmores disrupted it when they mistook cruelty for privilege. Arthur turned toward Leah. You are finished working tonight. Evelyn laughed. At least someone has finally fired her. Arthur ignored her. No, Leah. I am saying you no longer need permission to leave. Leah understood. She untied her apron and placed it on the stage. I resign. Arthur smiled. Best decision anyone has made in this building. He guided Leah and Naomi through the rear door before the reporters could surround them. They crossed a service corridor, entered a freight elevator, and emerged into an alley washed by Seattle rain. For several moments, the two women stood beneath an awning, breathing the cold night air. Naomi began laughing and crying at the same time. I have nowhere to go. You can stay with me, Leah said. You barely know me. I know what it looks like when someone finally chooses herself. Naomi looked back at the glowing tower where both their former lives were falling apart. My parents will say I am ungrateful. My mother says gratitude does not require surrender. Naomi wiped her face. She sounds wise. She is. They stepped into the rain together. Behind them, the Whitmore celebration continued collapsing. Ahead, neither woman knew what morning would bring. For the first time in years, both were walking toward uncertainty instead of captivity. By sunrise, recordings of Leah's performance had spread across the country. One video showed Nathan extending his foot before the champagne fell. Another showed Evelyn striking Leah's hand away. A third captured Graham's expression when he recognized the song. The story became larger than the discovery of an abandoned daughter. It became evidence of how powerful people behaved when they believed consequences could never reach them. Reporters surrounded Leah's small apartment in Tacoma. Naomi quickly became her protector, screening calls and rejecting offers designed to exploit the scandal. Do not sign anything, Naomi warned. Anyone who says an offer expires tonight is trying to steal tomorrow from you. Leah had barely slept. I only want to see my mother. Arthur drove them to the neurological center in his old station wagon. Margaret was seated beside a window overlooking wet cedar trees. Her body had become weak, but her eyes brightened when Leah entered. My songbird. Leah knelt beside her. I sang your song. Where? In a ballroom. That sounds expensive. Leah laughed despite her exhaustion. It was. She played the recording on her phone. Margaret listened silently. When the camera showed Graham, her fingers tightened around Leah's hand. He became old, she whispered. Did you know who he became? Margaret nodded. I discovered the truth years later. He was already married, and you were a child. I considered writing, but I could not ask someone to choose us after he had already chosen. You should have told me. I wanted you to live without waiting for a man who abandoned mine. He is my father. He helped create you, Margaret said. Being a father requires more. Leah rested her head carefully against her mother. Was the song his? The melody was. Some words were his. Others became mine. Margaret smiled sadly. Pain edits everything. During the following days, Whitmore Global's value fell. Board members demanded Graham's resignation, clients withdrew money, and regulators reopened questions about earlier business decisions. The company did not weaken merely because Graham had an unknown daughter. The scandal gave frightened employees permission to speak. Former assistants described secret settlements. Analysts reported manipulated risk documents. A retired accountant presented evidence that Graham had concealed losses before several acquisitions. His private betrayal had not caused every professional failure. It had revealed the character that made those failures possible. Evelyn released a statement accusing Leah of seeking money. The claim collapsed when Arthur produced old photographs of Margaret and Gabe performing together. A former club owner confirmed their relationship, and an old landlord found a lease bearing both names. A voluntary DNA test requested by Graham removed the final uncertainty. Leah was his daughter. Nathan lost his executive position and vanished from public view. Friends who had once crowded his parties stopped answering his calls. Naomi's parents demanded that she return home and apologize for humiliating them. She refused. Instead, she stayed on Leah's couch and began volunteering at Margaret's care center. She read to patients, organized donated clothing, and helped families understand difficult paperwork. There she met Dr. Samuel Reed, a neurologist who had treated Margaret before. He arranged for specialists to review her condition. Another visitor was Rosa Martinez, a retired music teacher from Yakima who had watched Leah's performance. Rosa had spent decades training children whose families could not afford lessons. "A voice like yours opens doors," Rosa said. "Without discipline, strangers will decide which door you enter." Rosa became Leah's teacher and advisor. Music producers and television programs called. A streaming company offered a documentary before Leah had finished reading the contract. She rejected nearly all of them. Her first performance after the ballroom was not on television. It was in the activity room of Margaret's care center. Leah sang for patients, nurses, cleaners, and families. Naomi and Arthur sat in front. Rosa watched from the back. Samuel stood beside Margaret's wheelchair. When Leah finished, Margaret raised her unsteady hands and applauded. The sound was weak. To Leah, it mattered more than the silence of the entire Hawthorne crown. 3 weeks later, a heavy cream-colored envelope arrived at Leah's apartment. Naomi handed it to her. Graham's attorney delivered it through Arthur. Leah placed it on the kitchen table and waited several minutes before opening it. The handwriting was elegant but unsteady. "Leah, no apology can repair the life I refuse to share with you. Asking for forgiveness would place another burden upon the person I have already burdened most. When I was young, I believed courage meant escaping poverty. I now understand that I escaped responsibility instead. Your mother loved me when I had nothing useful to offer. I repaid that love by treating ambition as wisdom and fear as strength. I told myself I would return after becoming successful. Each year, returning required more honesty than the year before, until cowardice became the structure of my life. The song was the last truthful thing I created. Hearing you sing it forced me to meet the man I buried. Truth arrived only after nothing remained for it to protect. I have placed much of my remaining personal wealth in a trust for you and Margaret. It is not payment. Nothing can purchase the years I abandoned. I will not contact either of you unless invited. You owe me no reply, no meeting, and no mercy. You did what I could not. You spoke before comfort could silence you. Gabe." Leah read the letter twice. The attached documents confirmed that Graham had transferred millions into a trust for medical care, education, housing, and artistic work. Naomi expected relief, but Leah looked frightened. "If I accept it, people will say Evelyn was right. Some people will say that whatever you do, my mother survived without him." "She survived," Naomi said. "That does not mean she must continue suffering, so strangers can admire her pride." Leah took the letter to Margaret and read it aloud. When she reached the signature, Margaret looked toward the window. He signed Gabe. "Yes, that was the man I loved. Do you want to see him?" Margaret remained silent. "I want him to understand that regret is not repair. I think he does. Understanding is the beginning of punishment, not the end." Leah held her hand. "What should I do with the money?" "Do not confuse refusing help with defeating him. If his wealth can ease suffering, let it finally do something honest." They accepted the trust under strict legal conditions. Graham would have no control over the money and no right to contact them. Part of it allowed Margaret to transfer to an advanced neurological center in Portland. New treatment restored some movement to her hands and improved her speech. Leah used another portion to create the River House Fund, which supported caregivers who had abandoned education or careers to care for sick relatives. Naomi became its operations director. Her understanding of wealthy donors was useful, but she refused to turn charity into social theater. At the first board meeting, a businessman proposed an extravagant fundraising gala. Naomi shook her head. "We will not spend the cost of a year of home care serving tiny meals beneath chandeliers." Arthur laughed, and the proposal disappeared. Rosa continued training Leah. Samuel organized music programs for patients. A nurse named Tessa Brooks helped families record songs and messages for relatives unable to attend performances. The unusual group became a community. Leah eventually signed with a small independent label managed by Daniel Cho, a producer who refused to manufacture false stories for musicians. "I do not want the Waitress scandal turned into a costume," Leah told him. "Good," Daniel answered. "I am interested in the artist who existed before that ballroom and the woman who came after it." Her first album took nearly a year to complete. She named it Beneath the Current. The final track was The River Keeps Your Name, but Leah changed the ending. In Margaret's version, the river waited for the absent traveler. In Leah's version, it continued forward, carrying memory without allowing memory to choose its destination. Graham's name remained in the news as investigations continued. He resigned from every board, sold the family mansion, and moved into a modest rented house near Bellingham. Evelyn filed for divorce. Her attorney arranged interviews in which she described herself as another victim of Graham's lies. But former employees soon spoke about years of insults, threats, and withheld wages. The society that once feared Evelyn stopped inviting her anywhere. Nathan attempted to repair his reputation through a statement written by public relations advisors. It mentioned personal growth, misunderstandings, and listening. It did not mention Leah's name. The public rejected it. Several months later, Nathan appeared at River House without warning. Naomi saw him through an office window. He looked thinner. His coat remained expensive, but the confidence inside it had disappeared. "You should leave," she told him. "I need to speak with Leah. She owes you nothing." Leah heard their voices and entered the hallway. Nathan lowered his eyes. "I came to apologize. For tripping me? For everything. That is a large word. I lost my job, my friends, and my engagement." Leah waited. Nathan seemed to expect sympathy. "Those are consequences that happened to you," she said. "An apology begins when you understand what happened to someone else." His face tightened. "I humiliated you. You tried. You humiliated yourself. My father refuses to speak to me. Perhaps he does not know how to face the person he helped you become." Nathan looked at Naomi. "I loved you." Naomi remained calm. "You loved being admired by me." He had no answer. Leah gave him the contact information for a counselor experienced in family trauma and abusive behavior. "What am I supposed to do with this?" "Something private. For once." Nathan left. Months later, Leah learned that he had taken a job coordinating deliveries for a food bank in Spokane. She could not know whether the change came from shame or genuine reflection. She decided that monitoring his life would keep her tied to him. Naomi slowly rebuilt her relationship with her parents. They never completely understood her decision, but they began respecting that she would no longer play the obedient daughter. Through their work at River House, Naomi and Samuel developed a quiet friendship. Leah noticed shared lunches and conversations that continued long after meetings. "This is different," Naomi admitted, "because he does not own an investment company, because he asks questions and waits for the answer. Arthur retired after the owners of the Hawthorne Crown pressured him to criticize Leah publicly. Instead, he opened a small cafe near Tacoma's theater district. He named it Maggie's Room. Photographs of local musicians covered the walls, and a small stage stood in one corner for anyone brave enough to perform. Margaret attended the opening in a wheelchair. Her illness remained, but treatment had given her more good days. Leah sang the first song. Afterward, Arthur showed her an old photograph. Margaret stood outside a music club beside a young Graham holding a guitar. On the back, someone had written, "Margaret and Gabe, before the world became serious." Leah placed the picture in her locket. Not to honor Graham's abandonment, but to remember that people were rarely born as the worst versions of themselves. They arrived there through choices, sometimes slowly, sometimes one silence at a time. 2 years after the night at the Hawthorne Crown, Leah performed at Benaroya Hall. Every seat was occupied. The audience included musicians, caregivers supported by River House, nurses from Margaret's former center, and families who had once believed exhaustion was something they had to endure alone. Arthur sat beside Rosa in the front row. Naomi and Samuel sat nearby, their hands loosely joined. Tessa managed a live stream for patients unable to attend. Daniel watched from the wings. Margaret waited backstage. Her health had declined again. She needed help speaking, and could no longer sit upright for long periods, but she had insisted on attending. Before the concert, Leah knelt beside her wheelchair. "Are you tired?" Margaret smiled. "I waited a lifetime to hear you in this hall. I can rest tomorrow." Leah sang about work, grief, aging, forgiveness, and the quiet courage of ordinary people. She did not sing about defeating the Whitmores. She had grown beyond building her identity around their destruction. Near the end, she brought Margaret onto the stage. The audience rose. "This woman taught me that a voice does not become powerful because it is loud," Leah said. "It becomes powerful when it carries something true." She began, "The river keeps your name." The melody was familiar, but the ending had changed. The river released the promise it had guarded. It carried no hatred toward the absent traveler. It simply refused to stop moving. Halfway through the song, Leah saw a man standing alone in the rear balcony. Graham. His hair had become almost completely white. He wore a simple dark coat and remained in the shadows. Leah's breath tightened, but her voice stayed steady. She did not stop or point him out. She allowed him to listen. After the concert, Graham did not approach. He left a small envelope with an usher and departed before the house lights rose. Inside was one sentence. "Thank you for allowing the song to become better than the man who wrote it." There was no request, address, or signature. Leah showed the note to Margaret. "He came?" her mother asked. "Yes." "Did you speak?" "No." Margaret nodded. Sometimes distance is the kindest truth people can manage. Several weeks later, Margaret died peacefully with Leah beside her. Naomi, Arthur, Rosa, and Samuel waited nearby. Leah expected grief to feel like collapse. Instead, it felt like entering a familiar house after the person who gave every object meaning had disappeared. She heard Margaret in running water, unfinished melodies, and curtains moving during rain. At the memorial, Leah sang without a microphone. Afterward, an elderly caregiver named Helen approached. "I cared for my husband for 12 years, Helen said. "I was angry for much of that time. Your mother's story taught me that love and exhaustion can live in the same room." Leah remembered those words. She understood that the most important part of her journey had never been the destruction of a wealthy family. It was recognizing the countless people who lived invisibly while the world celebrated louder forms of achievement: caregivers, cleaners, servers, nurses, lonely spouses, and aging parents. River House expanded into several states. Maggie's Room offered free performances each Sunday. Naomi married Samuel in a small garden ceremony without corporate sponsors or an enormous diamond. Nathan sent Leah one handwritten letter each year. She read them but never replied. Gradually, his letters stopped describing his own suffering and began describing the people he served. That change was enough. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation. Only evidence that consequence had perhaps become conscience. As Leah grew older, people often asked whether she regretted walking onto the stage that night. They expected a simple answer. She never had one. The truth changed her life, but it did not open only beautiful doors. Speaking cost Leah her job, her privacy, and the last illusion that her father might someday offer an explanation capable of repairing everything. Silence would have cost more. Silence would have taught Nathan that cruelty was harmless, Evelyn that dignity belonged only to the wealthy, and Graham that the past remained buried merely because no powerful person had chosen to uncover it. Most importantly, silence would have taught Leah to distrust the voice Margaret had spent a lifetime protecting. Years later, after gray appeared in Leah's hair, she returned to Maggie's room on the anniversary of Arthur's death. Tessa managed the cafe then, and photographs covered nearly every wall. One showed Arthur standing between Leah and Margaret. Another showed Naomi and Samuel dancing at their wedding. Near the stage hung the old photograph of Margaret and Gabe, before the world became serious. A nervous teenage singer waited behind the curtain. "I cannot go out there," the girl whispered. Her name was Maya. Her mother cleaned offices at night, and Maya worked weekends to help pay rent. She had received a place in Riverhouse's music program, but believed her life was too ordinary for anyone to hear. Leah sat beside her. "Do you think courage means fear disappears?" Maya nodded. "It does not. Courage means fear no longer receives the final decision. What if they laugh? Then they reveal themselves before you reveal anything about yourself. What if I make a mistake? You will. Then you will discover that surviving a mistake is easier than surviving a life built around avoiding one." Maya walked onto the stage. Leah listened from the wings and considered everything Margaret, Arthur, Naomi, and even Graham had taught her. A human life is not measured only by moments of victory. It is also measured by what a person refuses to become while losing. Graham believed wealth could protect him from regret. Evelyn believed status could protect her from judgment. Nathan believed inherited power could protect him from consequences. Each discovered that comfort can become a prison when its walls are built from fear, contempt, and dishonesty. Margaret owned almost nothing, yet she gave Leah something no fortune could manufacture. She taught her that suffering did not require surrendering tenderness. Margaret bent beneath illness, poverty, and abandonment, but bending never meant breaking. Like the river in her song, she carried love forward without allowing betrayal to poison everything it touched. Leah learned that forgiveness was not a debt owed to anyone who expressed regret. Sometimes forgiveness led to reconciliation. Sometimes it meant releasing hatred while keeping the door closed. Compassion did not require pretending that damage had never occurred. Boundaries could be merciful, and distance could be honest. Growing older also taught Leah that character was rarely built through grand public moments. It was formed through small choices made when no audience was watching. Character appeared when Arthur protected an employee, even though he might lose his position. It appeared when Naomi removed her engagement ring before knowing where she would sleep. It appeared when Samuel stayed late to explain a diagnosis, when Rosa trained a singer without trying to own her, and when Margaret allowed painful money to become useful without confusing acceptance with forgiveness. Even Graham's final decision carried a lesson. He could not restore the years he had stolen, but he could stop using wealth as a tool of control. His late honesty did not erase his cowardice. It only prevented that cowardice from having the final word. No one becomes noble in a single moment, just as no one becomes cruel all at once. Every day offers quiet rehearsals for the person we are becoming. Maya finished her song. The cafe filled with applause. Leah smiled through tears. She finally understood that her voice had never been her greatest gift. The greater gift was learning when to use it, when to listen, and when to make space for another person to be heard. Powerful people may own buildings, companies, and names engraved in stone. Yet dignity belongs equally to the server carrying a tray, the cleaner working after midnight, the adult child caring for an aging parent, and the frightened young singer stepping into unfamiliar light. Money can purchase silence for a time. Fear can preserve appearances for years. But truth, once carried by a courageous voice, moves like a river. It bends around walls, passes beneath locked doors, and continues beyond every person who once believed they could control it. Sooner or later, it reaches the open sea.